This is the second BRISMES event that we've organised to take place on Zoom, and we're very, very excited to have a really brilliant panel with us today. I'm Marral, and I'm a PhD student at LSE and a co-president of the BRISMES Student Section. So just a few words about BRISMES. For any of you who don't know or who are new to this forum, BRISMES is a community of educators and researchers in Middle East studies. We aim to encourage and promote interest by sharing information and encouraging cooperation in the scholarly study of the region. The student section in particular aims to create a network of support and advice for current and prospective graduate students. So like at this event today, we aim to host various events, workshops of interest, to the student and ECR community. We also raise awareness of academic resources, funding opportunities and career opportunities, both within and outside of academia. And we aim to make BRISMES more representative, better equipped to promote Middle Eastern studies, and we help the BRISMES Council understand and meet the needs of its student population. So I will now pass on to my colleague, Saeb Kasm.
Hi everyone, I'm Saeb and I'm co-president of the student section along with Marral. If you like today's event and to get the most of the BRISMES community, we encourage you to join BRISMES as a student member through the website online. Just a quick note about an upcoming event. We have an event entitled Thinking About Publishing Your First Academic Article or Book in December, and details of this will be coming soon. We are open to collaborations and to support students in the BRISMES network, so please do get in touch with us if you have any ideas. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the chair right now for the event today, who is Malaka Shwaikh, and who is also a BRISMES Council member. Malaka Shwaikh is an associate lecturer in peace and conflict studies at the University of St. Andrews. Her research covers decolonial, intersectional, and critical understandings of peace and conflict, focusing mostly on the Levant and North African regions. Her PhD research examined hunger strikes in the Palestinian context, arguing that Palestinian prisoners continue their resistance from within Israeli prisons, turning their contentious space into sites of resistance, with weaponization of their lives through hunger strikes being their last resort. I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Malaka to go over today's format for the event. Malaka, please.
Thank you, Marral and Saeb, and the BRISMES student section for organizing this really exciting event today. So I will briefly explain the format of today's event before we hear from the speakers. So each speaker will speak for about 7 to 10 minutes on their respective postdoc experience and mentoring, touching on a range of themes, including preparation and thinking ahead of postdoc positions. And the postdoc application process, learning from hiring panel feedback and or previous rejection, as well as interview or other advice that our speakers will be kindly and generously sharing with us today. This will allow for about 45 minutes from you as participant to ask for any question from the speakers today. So the event will take no longer than 90 minutes, about 45 minutes hearing from the speaker, and another 45 minutes for questions and answers. Participants will be able to ask questions by writing them in the chat, and Saeb and Marral will read them out once we begin the question and answer session in the second half of this event today. If you sent a question in via the Google form that was circulated beforehand, your question will also hopefully be read out. So welcome once again to this really exciting event. We have 4 exceptional speakers, all of whom have a wealth of experience in successfully acquiring a postdoc from the British Academy, from Leverhulme and JRF, or in mentoring a successful application as well. And we will start with Dr. Sarah Arens, who is a colleague from the University of St. Andrews. Really grateful to have you with us, Sarah. Sarah is currently a British Academy postdoctoral fellow at the University of St. Andrews with a project investigating the role of natural science and museums of Belgian colonialism. Following a PhD in French from Edinburgh in 2017, she has previously held a number of short-term research and/or teaching positions in the UK and the US. So without further ado, over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this. I'm very humbled so many of you have signed up. I'm going to everything I'm going to talk about, or the points I'm addressing, please feel free to ask me more questions about this later. And please bear in mind that I can only speak from my own experience. So this is just what has or has not worked for me, but it might be completely different for someone else. So as you already know, I'm a British Academy postdoctoral fellow. I'm currently in my second year. And between finishing my PhD in 2017 and starting my BA, my British Academy postdoc last year, I've held an 11-month postdoc fellowship at the Institute of Advanced Studies in the Humanities at the University of Edinburgh, and about 5 or more, I think, short-term research and/or teaching positions. And as much as I love being an academic, I think it's part of an honest discussion of navigating the postdoc period is also to be honest about its precarity. So be honest with yourself about whether your financial, your mental, and your physical health and other circumstances enable you to pursue this career, and it's important to have a plan B and plan C. I've experienced this period between 2017 and 19, so these 2 years between finishing my PhD and starting my now first long-term postdoc of 3 years. I've experienced that as very challenging and exhausting, and I've had to work multiple jobs at a time. I had to commute long hours and distances, and I've struggled with the uncertainty of not knowing how I'm going to pay my rent a few months later. So that just to bring the mood down a bit. But this is why my main advice is to be as strategic and prepared as possible in how you plan your applications. And from my experience, it's been helpful to think about building an application strategy as well. So for example, start applying for smaller grants first, and then on the back of that, apply for bigger schemes, because it's not a secret that these bigger schemes, like the ones we're talking about here today, but also national and private funding in other countries, such as the Mellon Foundation in the US or the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in Germany, they are all extremely competitive. And if you can show that your research has already attracted smaller pots of funding, that's great, and that makes it a stronger application. I started applying for jobs and postdocs. We can talk later about the difference, what I mean by that as well. At the start of the final year of my PhD in 2016, and I applied for a number of junior research fellowships at Oxford and Cambridge. I applied at UCL for one in London. I applied also for Leverhulme, and this taught me a couple of things I would like to briefly talk about. So on the one hand, none of them were successful. So until I had defended my thesis, I did not get shortlisted for anything. And it's part of that process is also to learn how to deal with that kind of rejection. So it felt a bit like it was wasted time that I could have used to do other things, like writing my PhD or preparing other publications. But on the other hand, these proposals were usually quite short. So especially for the bigger themes, the research proposals you have to write, they are about like 300 to 500 words, and they're actually not that long. So that helped me to come up with an idea for a substantial second book project after my PhD, and importantly, an idea that was able to mature and that I would keep working on. And this last point, I think, was key for applying for the fellowship I had at Edinburgh before. So this 11-month fellowship at Edinburgh's Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities, during which I then wrote my application for my British Academy postdoc. And finally, from what I can tell from when I met my British Academy fellows and colleagues last year, was that pretty much all of them had waited until the end of their eligibility period. So with the British Academy, you can only apply once. So in order to be best prepared, most of us try to accumulate previous funding and publications to strengthen our applications. And again, that's something I'm happy to talk about later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Sarah, for this really helpful overview and the importance. Yeah, you can hear me. And the importance of being strategic in this postdoc process. I'm very grateful for you for sharing these tips with us. And we'll come back to you with any questions as well later on. Our second speaker for today is Dr. Lorenzo Feltrin of the University of Warwick. So Lorenzo received his PhD in Politics and International Studies at the University of Warwick in January 2019 with a thesis titled Between the Hammer and the Anvil, the Trade Unions and the 2011 Arab Uprising in Morocco and Tunisia. He's interested in research areas of labor, social movements, and political ecology. He published his research in the Review of African Political Economy, Economic and Industrial Democracy, and Third World Quarterly. He is due to begin his Leverhulme Early Career Fellowship at the University of Birmingham in May 2021. So I will hand over to Lorenzo now. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much to the organizers of this event for inviting me. It's very nice to meet you, albeit not in person, but at least we produce less CO2 emissions, which is always good, I guess. So in this talk, I'll first talk about my academic trajectory to then draw some hopefully useful lessons from it. So same as the presentation before me by Sarah, this is based on my personal experience, and it's hard to make generalizations, and a lot of it is also down to luck to some extent. So sometimes it's just, you know, some coincidences that can help you out. So I have received a PhD in politics, as was mentioned, in January 2019 under the supervision of Prof. Nicola Pratt. And the topic was the trade unions, the 2011 Arab uprisings in Morocco and Tunisia. I had chosen this topic back in 2011, I guess because as a young and naive, basically, leftist student, I became enthusiastic about the Arab Spring and traveled to Egypt 2011, did some interviews, did my master's thesis on Egypt and Morocco, and then put together a PhD project on the two countries. And then I substituted the Egyptian case with the Tunisian case. But then during my PhD research, I started to ask myself questions that I never really thought about seriously before, about basically my positionality as an Italian dude funded by a British university doing research on Morocco and Tunisia. That are countries that I never really had a biographical relationship with. So I'm sure they were confident with questions of asymmetries in the production of knowledge that have to do, you know, with the academic system that we are involved in. I started to try to think ways of, you know, being more aware of this. And I thought it would probably be a good idea or something that I would find interesting to do another research, finding a relationship between the place where I'm from Veneto in northeastern Italy, and Tunisia, which is the country where I've been living the most during my PhD. So I've been there for 2 years. The obvious link would have been migration, but that's already been done a lot. There's already many research and studies on it. So I thought this wouldn't be, you know, a very original contribution on my part. So at some point I had some kind of illumination somehow that I thought this is actually a good idea, possibly something I would like to do. And this was comparing the petrochemical complex of Porto Marghera in Venice that had a long history of labor and environmental struggles with similar problems in a petrochemical complex in Tunisia. And because I realized during my research that the link between labor and environment is a crucial problem in other places as well, and there's little research on it, albeit some very good work. So I put together a research project comparing Porto Marghera and Tunisia. And this is when luck really comes in. This was at the last year of my PhD. And after I submitted my thesis, I found out that an ERC funded 5-year research project in the same university where I did my PhD at Warwick, but in a different department downstairs, in the sociology department, was looking for a research assistant on a project on environmental justice and the global petrochemical sector. So as you can imagine, the petrochemical sector is a very niche set of interest in the social science. And I had a research project on it. So I applied to the job and got the job as research assistant. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. And this has allowed me to basically be strategic and improve the research project by doing the reading that I had to do anyway for my job as research assistant. And then I have a stronger postdoc application to submit to a whole lot of different places. And eventually I was awarded the Larry Hulme Early Career Fellowship, which I will begin in May 2021. So in terms of the lessons for applying to postdocs, there are some standard things that you probably have heard from your PhD supervisor, or if you haven't talked about applying to postdocs with your PhD supervisor, I strongly advise you to do so, because that will save you a lot of sort of time trying to find out what is normally done in order to succeed. The first lesson is similar to the former presentation, really. It's good to be strategic. So in my case, try to combine your current work and your background, whatever that is, to your postdoc project, because that will improve the quality of the application. And at the same time, it will make a strong case that you are one of the best people around to do research on that particular topic. The second lesson is to apply many times, at least in my case. I'm a big expert in failed applications and not such a big expert in successful applications, because I was only one out of almost 30, you know, between postdocs and lectureships. So obviously don't get discouraged if the first 20 applications don't work out. That doesn't mean anything. There's still a chance, and a lot of people, you know, before me told me the same, which kind of helped me to keep applying. Third lesson is try to be quick in using feedback on rejected applications. So for example, my Marie Curie application was rejected just a few days before the Lever-Hulme deadline. There was a few comments that I could sort of integrate in the application quite quickly. So I've done it just before submitting the Lever-Hulme application, and that possibly has made a difference. And the fourth lesson is on the Lever-Hulme specifically, which, you know, is the fellowship that I was awarded, is that this is a two-step process. So you first apply to the host university, they do an internal selection, and then if you pass that, you go to the central level, and that's sort of, you know, the very competitive part of the process. However, don't underestimate the fact that you might be rejected at the first step. So in my case, I first applied with Bristol. I was rejected from the Bristol internal application because a big criterion there is the fit between your profile, your research project, and the proposed mentor. So they thought the fit wasn't good enough, and therefore the application wasn't likely to be successful at the central level. So if I didn't have a backup plan, if I hadn't already had contacted my mentor, David Bailey, at the University of Birmingham, then I would have had time to organize another internal submission. But because I already had, you know, this possibility of rejection in mind, I had contacted this mentor in Birmingham, so I had a backup plan, and I was able to then quickly submit the application to Birmingham, and eventually that resulted in me getting the fellowship. So if I didn't have the backup plan, I might be unemployed by now. So just to sum up, think a project that is related with your past work and background. Send out tons of applications. I know it's bad in terms of, you know, stress, but that's, you know, what happens in many cases. Quickly adjust your application to the feedback you receive, and have backup plans because they can be salvific. Many thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you so very much, Lorenzo, for this really helpful overview. Very intriguing insights indeed. And congratulations once again for winning this Leverhulme postdoc. Also for participants, feel free to submit any question at any point of time in the chat. Our third speaker today is Dr. Mezna Qato of the University of Cambridge. We're very grateful to have you with us, Mezna. Mezna is a Margaret and Steve Fellow at Newnham College at the University of Cambridge. Previously, she was Junior Research Fellow at King's College, Cambridge, and Spencer Postdoctoral Fellow at the National Academy of Education in the US. She's a social historian of modern Middle East. Her research and teaching interest centers on histories and theories of social, economic, and political transformation amongst refugees and stateless communities, the politics and practice of archives, and global micro-theories of movements and collectivities across the region. So very grateful to have you with us again, Dr. Mezna, and it's over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malaka. Thank you all for having me and for organizing this. It's really great. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the Junior Research Fellowships at Oxford and Cambridge. I don't know how much people know about these fellowships, but they are fellowships that are attached to the colleges of Oxford and Cambridge rather than faculties. They are competitions that happen every year, or in some cases every other year within these colleges. And they can last between 3 and 4 years. And the competitions for them tend to be quite stiff. There's quite a lot that's been written about them, and I'm happy to answer more general questions about what these kinds of research fellowships look like, what they are, etc. But I wanted to take up my time now to talk a little bit about my experiences with that application process, and also in the process leading up to applying for JRS. So at the tail end of my doctorate, and I have to say that I'm someone whose story of my PhD was quite long, actually. I dipped in and out of finishing my doctorate for longer than most people. But by the time I was nearing the end of my writing process, I went to my supervisor and I said, well, do I have a shot at anything? And he said, it doesn't hurt to try. So one of the things that I did, maybe it's just a personality thing of mine, but I found it really helpful, was to sort of map out what it would look like to apply to anything. And I did so by Google, God bless Google, and also by asking around a little bit amongst colleagues who are more senior than I, but younger, so more familiar with the more recent process and experience of postdoc applications, about what they would advise. And one thing that they recommended that I found was very useful was to look at, things like Humanities and Postdocs Wiki, which has often a year list of all of the postdoc applications or calls, both in the US and the UK. And what's really helpful about that is that it gave me a sense of the timeline of these applications. So I was able to build like a little bit of an Excel sheet of when these postdocs were due, what they're requiring, and what they're requiring of my letter writers. And this is something I think that's really important to remember and is a little unique to the UK. In contrast to doctorates in the US, where you have a committee, in the UK, often you are supervised by one person, but postdocs require 3 letters. And what I found quite common is that UK postdoc applications, people applying, scramble for the other 2 letters. So I think what's important also is to build relationships with scholars within your university who can write you robust, informed letters that are strong and healthy and can complement the letter of your supervisor. And I say this because in particular with the JRF, letters of recommendation are weighed pretty heavily. And they're weighed pretty heavily because of, you know, the JRFs certainly have a reputation for being inside hires, and I'm happy to talk about that more. But I think it's also because colleges deeply value a scholar entering that college who is vouched for by their colleagues and who's vouched for as a good colleague. And so these letters then matter quite a bit. You know, I think all of the things that earlier speakers said about proposals counts as well. You know, write a solid proposal, draft multiple versions of this proposal, you know, mull it over, rewrite it, send it to friends. And because it should read as a kind of narrative that can be read by a specialist and a non-specialist and have something to offer at both levels. And so in my experience, that took a bit of time. So when I applied for my JRFs in, you know, most JRF applications are due between July and November, and I applied to quite a few of them. You know, they were not things that I thought were particularly promising. The King's one, when I was shortlisted, they asked me for a writing sample, which is also something that you should be prepared to offer. And also my application got sent to 2 external assessors or examiners. So you apply and then the college sends your application to 2 external scholars who then assess the application if it's shortlisted. So the process is quite long, and to think about that anxiety, and also part of the planning is that, you know, the fall usually of your final year of writing will be spent applying for a lot of these postdocs, or will be spent applying for jobs or shorter grants that will buy enough time for you to spend the year afterwards or months afterwards working or having some sort of funding while you apply. Right. So the 2 main things that I'm saying that I feel I'm adding to the earlier speakers is the importance of letters, the importance of a solid sort of well-written, robust proposal, and a mapping. That you create and plan a mapping. It will calm you down. It'll calm your supervisors down. You can send them a list of all the letters and they send them out at once in this kind of really, you know, help them help you sort of way. And to build relationships with more than one person during your doctorate who can write you strong letters. Thank you.
This is such a helpful insight, Mezna. Thank you so very much for sharing your experience with us. I especially found the point on the importance of building relationship with scholars in the field that would complement the letter of recommendations from the supervisors very helpful here. So thank you once again for sharing and being generous with sharing your thoughts with us. Um, our last speaker for today is Professor Charles Tripp of SOAS. Um, Charles Tripp is Professor of Politics with reference to the Middle East and North Africa at the School of Oriental and African Studies of the University of London, and a Fellow of the British Academy, where he is also Vice President for the British International Research Institute. His research interests include the nature of autocracy, state and resistance in the Middle East, the politics of Islamic identity, and the role of art in the constitution of the political or of the politics. He is the author of several books from Cambridge, including Islam and Moral Economy, The Power and the People, and his most recently, or this is the most recently published book for him from 2013. He is presently working on a project on the emergence of the public and rethinking of Republican ideals in Tunisia. Also grateful to have you with us, Professor Tripp, and it's over to you now.
Malaka, thank you very much indeed. And thank you also, BRISMES, for the invitation. And I suppose I come here as the representative of a rather older order, but of course it means because of that I'm now also, or I have been supervisor, I'm now emeritus professor at SOAS, but I'm also on panels that look at postdoctoral applications. And so we thought it'd be useful if I were to come here, not to give you inside tips, but actually just to get a sense of what's useful. So I thought of dividing what I have to say into what you might call the procedural aspects and the substantive aspects of postdoctoral applications. Many of the procedural questions and aspects have been covered really well by the three speakers coming before me, because I was also going to emphasize doing your homework, doing your preparations to make sure that the fellowships that you're applying for are appropriate to you, that they are asking of you the sort of things you need to do, and that you're a good fit for them. So I think that that's important. There struck me one thing that's quite important that comes up, and I put this in the procedural, which is the question of interdisciplinarity, because often it's in two senses. One is that you've just gone through 5 years of PhD training in a particular discipline, in which you may or may not have informed your studies by interdisciplinary research. But one of the things about applying for a postdoc often is the fact that people like to see that you're expanding beyond your discipline. So you might be writing for your discipline, and that's fine because that's where you have your greatest training. But they're also often, it's quite important to think about what your discipline can say to others, and critically and engage with them. But there's a sort of practical side too, which I think Mezna talked about, which is that your application will be looked at by people who aren't specialists in your discipline. I mean, it'll be looked by people who are specialists, but also by a panel, which may include a number of people who are not specialists in your discipline. So to be able to communicate that to others is quite an important part of it. So in practical terms, it's important. So think about who may be reading your application, or the proposal, that's part of it. Think about the success rates of particular schemes, not to be discouraged, but to think, I think somebody mentioned about, I think Sarah, that some of them, they have a one-off chance and they're really low success rates. So it's perhaps to keep that to the end. And I think that, I know the British Academy ones, postdoctoral research fellowships have a success rate of 10% or so, which isn't great because they only give about 45, 50 a year. Others are slightly better, but even so, it is a terrifically competitive thing. So think about that. Be also, I think in many cases, be very persuasive and clear in your application about why you want to take your postdoctoral award to a particular institution to work with particular people. And that's come up again in previous things, because I think, again, I mean, obviously JRFs are different because you're applying to an institution. Some universities have their own, but there are some like Leverhulme, British Academy, where they expect you to name the institution that you're going to take it to and the people you're going to work with. And I think that it really is important that you demonstrate that you have something to say to them and that you're going to engage meaningfully with them. You're not just doing it for reasons of prestige or whatever. You need to be able to answer that really well. On a practical side, which hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think it's really important to get as many people to read your application before you send it off as you possibly can. I mean, both you could say your supervisors, your mentors, but also your peers and peers who don't work in your field, because then they'll come back and say, I just really don't understand that paragraph. And then you find yourself having to explain. So it really helps in terms of clarity to do something like that. In terms of publication, I know for British Academy applications, it's really important, not necessarily for all of them. It really is important that you have at least one, preferably two publications before you apply. In the British Academy case, you have to effectively, because there's a first stage application of the postdoctoral research fellowships. And the second stage, if you get through to the second stage, in the second stage, you have to submit published work. So really is important. Not a monograph, but something that you will have published before you've applied for the postdoctoral fellowship. And I think that was the point that Sarah was making as well, is that's why she left those applications to the last bit, so that you would already have something to submit with it in some form. And in terms of networking, Mezna was very useful, I think, very helpful about making sure you're networking for reference letters, but also in terms of networking to get a sense of what's out there. There are a lot of institutions, the British Academy, but others run symposia, workshops for early career researchers. And you have to apply for them, but they're much looser in a sense. They're not like including a research proposal. And if you get included in them, they're not only really stimulating events in themselves, but they also give you a very good idea of what's going on in areas that you're interested in. And so I would really encourage you to keep an eye out for those things. They're run by the British Academy. I think the SRC, AHRC runs them, particular universities run them, research projects run them. So again, just keep an eye out for them. So those are some of the procedural questions I thought worth bringing to your attention. On the substantive ones, these may seem quite obvious in some ways, but I see them both from these substantive words of advice come from both seeing my own students applying for postdoctoral research fellows and also being on panels judging them. The first point, which I would really drive home, which may seem like stating the obvious, state your argument clearly from the outset. Make sure that you have not only a research question, but also something you're hoping to establish or to prove. And say that, even if you feel quite tentative about it, that's fine. But actually, it really is important, because that allows you to do a number of things. It allows you to say, why is it important in the context of your own field? You can stake your claim to a certain degree of originality in doing that, showing how it is different from the kinds of arguments that have been put forward elsewhere through critical engagement. It's not going to be fully developed. It's only a proposal, but you really need to show the people who are reading it that you have something distinct you want to say and argue. Within that, I would say, inject some passion into your proposal. And I think that's important. Not unreasonably, but something which shows that you're enthused and you can communicate that enthusiasm to others. I think that's really important, because and that's a question of tone as much as anything, sometimes the words you use. Please avoid all descriptive terms. The numbers of proposals you get which say they're going to illuminate something, give an account of something, reflect on something, depict something, narrate something, explore something, that's fine, but only if it's tied to a very specific argument that you're trying to make. In order to make this argument, I want to explore X, that's fine. But I want to explore X. No, don't do that. Please don't do that, because that's when people immediately stop reading it. So it really is important. The other thing I think is write clearly, obviously, but also as if you're explaining the project to someone and its argument, who may not be an expert in your field. This goes back to the first point that I made, that this is something that you need to be able to communicate that and to communicate the importance of it to somebody who isn't simply narrowly specialized in one particular area. The other point that came up, I think came up briefly now, which is think very carefully about how the postdoc project is related to your doctorate. It's quite a delicate balance. And I've seen projects rejected because they're too close to the doctorate. In other words, the reaction of the panel is, oh, but you know, this seems to be saying the same kind of thing. And I can see the tendency is to do that because that's the thing you spent the last 5 years on. But what I would argue is what you should do is take your cue from your doctorate, demonstrate how the work you've done for your doctorate is informing you and has opened new fields for you, in some senses, new avenues of exploration, and you're going to explore them in the postdoctoral. So practically all postdoctoral fellowships that I know of are asking you to do new work, obviously built upon and based upon the work you've already done. There are some postdoctoral fellowships which are more about turning your doctorate into a book. And that's a different kind of postdoctoral fellowship, but it's certainly not the, for instance, British Academy one. So as I said, it's a fine line to draw, but that's where you need to think a bit about it. And it may be exactly the sort of thing you should be talking to your supervisor about as well, because you want to demonstrate you're doing something new. Finally, I think that I've often been quite impressed in postdoctoral applications where the candidate isn't just thinking of themselves. In other words, they're going to do something that's important, but they're also building into the application for funding for a workshop, for public engagement, for encouragement of other early career researchers, and for knowledge transfer. In other words, engagement of people overseas in one form or another. So I'm not saying that's a necessary part, and some projects don't lend themselves to that, but it's often been really encouraging when people, in applying for something that's really important intellectually and substantively for themselves, are also thinking about how they can engage others and benefit others. But I think that's all I should go before I go on, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Charles, for this really helpful and detailed overview. And I think the focus on interdisciplinarity and networking is very intriguing, surely here. Someone seems to be recording. Can you all hear me? Sorry. Okay, good. And I also really love how all our speakers, to some extent, emphasize the importance and the significance of networking, whether this is to know more about the latest research project and postdoc that is out there in the job market, or to write letters of recommendation that would complement the letters of recommendations that are coming from the supervisors. So thanks to all our speakers once again for being generous with their thoughts. And we'll just go directly to the questions and answers session now after these helpful overviews from the speakers.